Shana Tova. It is truly good to see everyone who is here in our sanctuary this day, a true blessing. On the high holidays, I often like to connect things familiar to people, from contemporary culture to our Jewish teachings. I do this to impart an appreciation of the eternal wisdom and insights of our sages and sources, to offer a framework for how to understand and respond to the events in our lives from a Jewish perspective, and to convey the enduring relevance of Judaism. By so doing, the underlying message I'm trying to give is that being Jewish offers a prescription for living and for coping with life. Or to be even more concise, the message can be summed up in two words: be Jewish. The high holidays are a time of introspection, a time when each of us is called to look inward, to do an individual cheshbon hanefesh, to look into our souls and consider what we need to change in our lives and what we need to do to improve our world. Think of it as an annual course correction, for our sages tell us that the origin of the word chet, which means sin, is actually to miss the mark. They saw this time of year, when the whole world is judged, as a call to heed the sound of the shofar, which we heard so beautifully a few moments ago. It is meant to motivate us to pause and to stop our routine, to set aside these days and gather as a community in a house of worship, so that we will reflect, assess, and adjust our priorities, and evaluate the choices we make, which determine how we live our lives. It summons us to direct our efforts to strive to bring out the good implanted in each of us by the Holy One, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In light of this, I want to raise and discuss on this Rosh Hashanah a relatively recent phenomenon, a term which as recently as just a few years ago was not part of our lexicon. It's a disturbing trend, which gets to the very essence of some of the themes that are at the very foundational concepts of this holiday. Living in a hyper-connected age, where social media rapidly amplifies, intensifies, and multiplies messages, it is possible to instantaneously ostracize and eliminate people who are perceived as having made offensive comments or racial slurs, as well as those whose opinions do not conform to the norm or to our own perspective. I'm referring, of course, to what has come to be known as cancel culture. In our polarized, emotionally charged world, the response can be swift and it can be devastating. We can all cite and think of countless examples where the public censure in social media can mark someone for life, resulting in loss of prestige, loss of their status and employment. In some instances, a single stupid, insensitive, inappropriate comment or posting can derail a person's career and tarnish their life's accomplishments. And it's not just people who are the subject of such condemnation, but also unpopular or unorthodox ideas, unacceptable or unconventional political positions or opinions, anything which can be deemed to be beyond the pale or outside the realm of what some consider respectable. Now, on the positive side, the rejection introduces an element of accountability and shows that there are consequences to what we say and what we do. The strong societal indignation can help to identify odious and obnoxious behaviors or opinions and make us all a bit more sensitive to what we say, to our inborn prejudices, how we act, and how we treat others. The adverse negative publicity and accompanying public shaming of individuals who make hurtful statements or express heinous opinions can shine light on and draw attention to prejudices, to bigotry or stereotypes, and help to render them unacceptable and obsolete and move them out of the public realm. Jewish teachings throughout the ages constantly command us to be considerate of the feelings of others and to be cautious with our words and the impact they can have. We're told to be consistent in our private as well as our public communications and actions. Yehei Adam Yirah Shamayim B'seter Uvagalui. It seems these days, the line between the two is becoming increasingly blurred, with the domain of what stays private constantly shrinking. No one is immune, nor should they get a pass just because they are famous. Some instances of disqualification are obvious, especially when they are consistent and persistent and express and reveal deeply felt insensitivities and unacceptable attitudes, or when there's no remorse or understanding by the offender of what it is that they have done wrong. The once beloved Bill Cosby is no longer held in the esteem he once enjoyed after more than 50 women came forward and revealed what he had done to them against their will. Similarly, Hollywood icon Harvey Weinstein no longer enjoys the power that he once wielded in the film industry, now that a number of stories of how he used his power to manipulate and take advantage of vulnerable women have come out. While the dismissal of predators like Cosby and Weinstein and others who have been punished and rebuked for the repulsive behavior is understandable, there are those who should be canceled, like the unrepentant Jew hater Louis Farrakhan, who somehow escaped the universal rebuke that he clearly deserves. And then there are instances which might not be quite as blatant or obvious and clear-cut, which are a bit more complicated and ambiguous. There may be times when it's difficult to ascertain and who to believe, the accuser or the accused. The advice of Yehoshua ben Parachia in Pirkei Avot is appropriate, who said, Hevei dan et kol ha'adam lekaf zachut, when assessing people, judge all with a scale in their favor, meaning to always give a person the benefit of the doubt, but it's seldom adhered to today. With few checks on balances on self-appointed arbiters of virtue, there can be excesses and abuses. The response may exceed the offense, and the retribution sometimes can be mean-spirited and harsh in and of itself. While demanding that every word that is uttered should be judged and weighed, offenders can be attacked with intense vengeance and denied the opportunity to defend or explain themselves. An accusation can be based on rumor, false information, or innuendo, without sufficient investigation of the veracity of the charge. And once the truth comes out, more often than not, it's too late. The irreparable damage to one's reputation has already been done. Rumors and gossip are so despised that the Talmud says it's worse than murder, because when murder is committed, one person dies. But in the case of a false rumor, 3 are irreparably injured: the one who utters the slander, the subject of the comment, and the person who hears it. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs tells the story in the last book he wrote, Morality, of a Canadian psychologist who was denied a research fellowship at the Cambridge University School of Divinity after a photograph surfaced of him standing alongside an individual after a book signing who was wearing a t-shirt with an offensive message. That there was no indication that the professor had any idea of what was written there, or that he endorsed the message, or was even aware of it being on the guy's shirt, that he even knew the person with whom he was photographed. All of that was irrelevant. He was canceled. There have been instances of social media postings from decades ago being dredged up, raising the question, should there be a statute of limitations on dumb things that we say and do when we were young? Questions have also been raised about how to deal with standards that evolve and that change, and what to do when what once was acceptable no longer is. As one woman quoted in an article in the New York Times last year, speaking from personal experience, said, quote, "You could do something stupid when you're 15, say something, and then 10 years later, that shapes how people perceive you. We all do cringy things and make dumb mistakes, but social media's existence has brought that into a place where people can take something you did back then and make it into who you are now. They take on a life of their own." But people are not the only victims of cancel culture. It can pertain to companies and products, as well as in the realm of politics and ideas, where people are unwilling to hear or to tolerate opinions contrary to their own. Instead, we just ignore or cancel them, contributing to the polarization that we feel these days. The problem is especially acute in places that are supposed to be cathedrals of free expression, and places where an open exchange of ideas is supposed to take place: academia and journalism. James Bennett was harshly criticized and forced to resign from his position as editor of the editorial page of the New York Times because he committed the unforgivable sin of publishing an op-ed by a conservative Republican senator. The senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, was writing about how to respond to riots. And as a result of publishing it, Bennett lost his job. Campaigns have been launched on college campuses to pressure administrations and organizations to disinvite controversial speakers. Student-initiated social media campaigns to cancel those who articulate out-of-vogue viewpoints and shoutdowns, whose purpose is to prevent speakers from expressing opinions outside of the mainstream, are all increasingly common on college campuses across the country. Jews and supporters of Israel have felt the brunt of the phenomenon. Pro-Israel speakers and its ambassadors have been denied the opportunity to speak on college campuses. Even those who have no political agenda, such as brilliant professors and scientists, are also shut out if they come from Israel. And ironically, in some instances, these lecturers are even more liberal and more radical than the groups who object to their appearance and are preventing them from speaking on their campus. Andrew Pessin, professor of philosophy at Connecticut College and author of several books on philosophy and 2 novels, commented in a recent article about what's happening today in universities in America. He wrote, quote, in place of a neutral forum for civil debate, in the shared pursuit of truth, we find the enforcement of official orthodoxies. Disagreement, once the driving force of intellectual advancement, now is anathema. If you dare to differ from some particular unorthodoxy, must be because you enjoy privileges that blind you to the experiences of others. Or worse, it's because you are actively defending those privileges. He says you risk being called out and accused of being, quote, a racist or a homophobe or a transphobe or an Islamophobe or a Zionist. All of this culminates in cancel culture, the notion that those who disagree with the orthodoxies must be eliminated from the table of discourse, and in some cases, from the campus altogether, including the increasingly frequent cancellation of Jews, especially Jews who support Israel. A recent survey of over 2,100 college students revealed that 85% of students reported that they have stopped themselves from expressing an opinion on sensitive political topics to avoid offending other students, at least occasionally, with 20% doing so frequently. The shutting down of dialogue, the suppressing of discourse is frighteningly authoritarian. Not only do we not wish to hear from those with whom we disagree, we cease to associate and speak with those whose opinion or politics is different than ours. According to a poll recently conducted by The Economist, 38% of both Democrats and Republicans said they would be somewhat or very upset at the prospect of their child marrying someone from the opposite political party. Now, the dangers of this particular trend that I'm referring to may be the only thing that our 2 immediate past presidents agree upon. Listen to this. In July of 2020, Donald Trump criticized cancel culture in a speech comparing it to totalitarianism and said that it is a political weapon used to punish and shame dissenters by driving them from their jobs and demanding submission. And then on several occasions, Barack Obama has warned against social media call-out culture, which can amount to condemning people all the time, saying, quote, people who do really good stuff have flaws. People who you are fighting may love their kids and share certain things with you, end quote. At least they agree on one thing. And they're both alluding to a problem that I spoke about a few years ago on the high holidays, when I discussed what can happen when we make snap judgments and draw conclusions based on incomplete or limited information, and we don't take the whole picture, the total individual or situation, into consideration. What does Judaism have to say about all this? Well, our tradition cherishes machloket, disagreements, especially those which are deemed as being l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. For they fine-tune our ideas, they sharpen our critical thinking. The Talmud records, respects, and preserves minority opinions rejected by the majority. In fact, the Bible itself begins by presenting two very different versions of how the world was created, side by side. Furthermore, if ever there was justification for canceling anyone, God would have been fully justified to cancel the Jewish people. And in fact, he almost did. After liberating the children of Israel from Egyptian bondage, sending the 10 plagues upon the Egyptians, opening the Red Sea for them to pass through, and then closing it on the Egyptians who were in hot pursuit, the children of Israel committed the ultimate sin. They built a golden calf to worship. When I think about this, I'm reminded of the story of the parents who asked their son, "What do you learn in Hebrew school?" And the kid came home and he told his parents he learned how Moses rescued the children of Israel from being slaves in Egypt. The parents asked him to explain what he learned and how it happened. And the kid said, well, what happened was Moses knew he was in trouble, so he called on the Israeli army to come and help him. The army swept in and in a daring operation airlifted the children of Israel by helicopter to the other side of the Red Sea. Then they placed mines in the Red Sea so they would explode and the Egyptians wouldn't be able to come after them. Well, the incredulous, disbelieving parents questioned their child and said, "Is that really what they taught you?" And the kid sheepishly admitted, "No, but you'd never believe what they did tell us." Well, apparently the children of Israel who saw it didn't believe. After witnessing firsthand God's redemptive power, they miscalculated by a day the amount of time Moses had been on Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments, and they collectively commit the biggest sin imaginable. Showing no gratitude, they violate a fundamental principle of Judaism. They go and build an idol. An idol. What were they thinking? Even kids in a Jewish preschool know you're not supposed to do that. Hashem is furious and tells Moses he's going to wipe out the people. In today's language, we would say, God has decided to cancel them. And there's almost nothing the people could have done that would have been worse than this particular sin. But Moses, the lover and defender of his people, prevails upon God and persuades him not to give up on the stiff-necked people and not to destroy them. There are other instances in the Tanakh when the people of Israel or individuals sin, err, disappoint, whether it's Judah, whether it's David, and they incur the wrath of God. But ultimately, God relents and doesn't cancel them. He gives them another chance. One of my favorite stories in the Midrash tells that one night Abraham was visited in his tent by someone who was passing by, who sought to take refuge from a terrible sandstorm. And after they spoke for a while, the man revealed that he didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in one God. In fact, he said fire was what he worshipped. And according to the story, when Abraham heard this, he cast the old man out of his tent into the darkness of the night, wanting nothing to do with him. But according to the story, God then appeared to Abraham in a dream, and he said to him, "Avraham, B'ni, my son, I've put up with this man's ignorance for 70 years. Don't you think you could have tolerated it for just one night?" What a beautiful story. The attitude is consistent with the message found in the Talmud and throughout the liturgy of the high holidays. Like God, we should be understanding and forgiving. We should hate the sin, but not the sinner. Perhaps worst of all, canceling someone leaves no room or chance for remorse or regret. One of the primary objectives from a Jewish perspective is that canceling another person means giving up on them. And this is the problem. This is the problem. For this approach is antithetical to the very essence of what these Yamim Hanoraim are all about. Cancel culture does not offer the possibility for a person to change, to admit they were wrong, that they regret what they had said or done. Jumping to quick, unequivocal, draconian conclusions eliminates the possibility of giving a person the chance to acknowledge, to learn, or to grow from their mistake. All of which contrasts with a central theme of this season, the concept of teshuvah, that we can repent, that we can make amends, and that we can change our ways. TV show host, anchor, and musician Nick Cannon was removed from his long-running comedy improv show Wild 'N Out last year after he made anti-Semitic comments on his broad podcast and YouTube show called Cannon's Class. Jewish leaders condemned the anti-Semitic rhetoric that was spewed on his show. But that's not where the story ends. Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles and Rabbi Norman Moranz of the American Jewish Committee both reached out to Cannon and demanded an apology. But that's not all they did. They each opened a dialogue with him. As Rabbi Cooper told me when I asked him how this all came about, he said that Cannon is actually an extremely bright young man, an intellectually curious lifelong learner, who is a Howard University School of Divinity doctoral student. And as a result of their discussions and their study together of Jewish texts and history, he came to realize that the things he thought were based on fact turned out to be nothing more than hateful propaganda, and he came to reject it. Rabbi Moranz explained this turnaround, saying, in other incidents of celebrities expressing anti-Semitic comments, we've heard at times when sometimes they'll utter a formulaic text expressing regret and the desire to grow, but Cannon did not follow that pattern. Rabbi Moranz explains, while he issued a series of apologies in his own unique style, he dedicated a good part of the past month to learning more about Jews and Judaism. And once he did, he now understands why his words were so blatantly anti-Semitic and has begun the process of undoing the damage he has caused. Cannon, in his apology on Twitter, wrote the following: "First and foremost, I express my deepest and most sincere apologies to my Jewish sisters and brothers for the hurtful and divisive words that came out of my mouth during my interview with Richard Griffith. They reinforce the worst stereotypes of a proud and magnificent people, and I feel ashamed of the uninformed and naive place that these words came from. The video of this interview has since been removed." He says, "I used words and reference literature I assumed to be factual to uplift my community, but instead, it turned out to be hateful propaganda and stereotypical rhetoric that pained another community, and for this, I'm deeply sorry. But together, now we can write a new chapter of healing." Not only did he do teshuvah, by the way, but he also performed the mitzvah of tzedakah. When he was reinstated on his show, when it was realized his apology was sincere, he donated his first paycheck to the Simon Wiesenthal Center combating anti-Semitism. Another incident you may have heard of, a player for the Miami Heat, Myers Leonard, made a derogatory comment about Jews that was widely circulated. The sharp reaction caught him off guard, and so he embarked on a similar journey, contacting Jewish organizations to begin the process of education, of healing, and of redemption. And 2 days after using the slur, Leonard spoke with leaders of the Miami Jewish community. He met with the Chabad rabbi in Hallandale, Florida. He had a Shabbat dinner with him. To show his remorse, he assisted in delivering over 500 food packages to elderly Jews and Holocaust survivors in Florida for Passover. One woman, recognizing the basketball star, was so excited when he delivered the package to her door, she said, "He realizes that he had offended us, and he really wants to show the Jewish community that he never meant them harm, and that he's in solidarity with us, in support and apologetic." The rabbi said he told Leonard that one beautiful thing about the Jewish people is that we've suffered so much, but if someone is truly sincere, we are a very forgiving people. Indeed, we have a name for this. It's called teshuvah. It means admitting a mistake has been made and taking responsibility and ownership for it. But teshuvah is much more than just admitting we've done something wrong and changing our behavior. It also means asking forgiveness of the one whom we have wronged and being willing to accept that. Well, I've been referring to what happens with opinions, politics, and public figures, such as politicians, celebrities, basketball players, professors, or writers, when they say things that are in poor taste, out of fashion, or they tweet something of questionable judgment. Canceling can also happen much, much closer to home, to teachers, to youngsters, classmates, associates, friends, and even family members. Unfortunately, all too often, in families and personal relationships, there are instances when people stop talking to each other, perhaps for a belief that is held, or something happens, something is said, feelings are hurt, misunderstandings arise, people become indignant, and a relationship is ended. Psychologists and therapists these days advise patients to cut out those harmful relationships in their lives, which may be a source of discomfort. But that's not what our tradition says. Our tradition encourages us to be compassionate and understanding, to have rachmanis, to have mercy toward others, even those who have wronged us, just as God did with the children of Israel when they sinned in the wilderness of Sinai. The beauty of the two stories about Nick Cannon and Myers Leonard is not just that they came to realize and recognize that what they had done was wrong and hurtful, and that they asked for forgiveness, but that the Jewish community allowed them to repent and to express regret, turning something negative into something positive. And so teshuvah entails being willing to forgive and pardon. When a person who expresses remorse, we can become so entrenched and so righteous, self-righteous about our rejection of another that we're unwilling to absolve and accept or recognize the sincere apology from someone we have canceled, but who wishes to make amends. As fictional TV football coach Ted Lasso, played by Jason Sudeikis, tells one of his players who was upset for missing an easy shot, the happiest animal in the world is the goldfish, because it has a memory of 10 seconds. This is a time for teshuvah, not a time to dwell on past grudges or to relive perceived slights. Take Ted Lasso's advice. Be a goldfish. Rosh Hashanah is a time to heal and to repair our world and our relationships. Don't cancel people. Don't remain separated or distant from loved ones for something they said or they did. Reach out to them. Give them a chance. Open a new chapter, which after all is the meaning and blessing of the very gift of this Rosh Hashanah. It is a new year, a time for a new beginning. May this new year, be one of peace and healing for our world, for our families, our loved ones, and for each and every one of us. And let us say, Amen.